Hello and welcome to Alive and Composing, the wonderful world of innova, with today's guest, Dr. Justin Rubin.
Hi.
Would you please state your name for the record?
Justin Rubin.
And we would like to know, do you have a pet? What do you name your pet, if you have one?
I don't have a pet, no. But my son really wants a tortoise. So that's going to be in our lives pretty soon.
Is that because all of your lives are hectic up here in Duluth?
I think it probably is. And he also loves dinosaurs. And so that's the closest we're going to get to getting a dinosaur, is a reptile.
Good. And if you weren't making music as a career, what would you have ended up doing?
That's a very good question. I can't imagine myself doing anything else. Every time someone asks me if I wasn't teaching and in music, I'd probably be driving a taxi or something, because I like to drive and I will go anywhere to drive. So, and I will drive in circles, and people know I will do that often. So if I wasn't making music, I can't imagine doing anything else.
Do you think your musical compositional thinking is somehow related to traveling, if not driving in circles? Do you see a structural connection?
You know, that's an interesting thing. The pieces that I've been writing lately, they start to become a little bit wandering vines. I used to think a lot about classical structures and how do I fit in with a classical structure and form and so forth, but I realized that my forms sometimes just emerge out of letting the various themes and motives start to talk to each other. And yeah, they just come back, and maybe it is a little bit going in circles, and I don't mind admitting to that. And eventually they do kind of find how they speak to one another, and I let them go where they want to go. I've kind of given it that freedom, but it's taken a lot of time for me to give it that freedom.
I've seen paintings by Justin Rubin. Are you related?
Yes, there was a time, and I think it was about 10 years ago or so, where music became a frustration for me. I came to a dead end, and I didn't see a way out with it. But I did still have a creative impulse, and painting was something I turned to for about 3 or 4 years. And I still did a little bit of composing, but not so much. I did a lot of playing, but it was a time for me perhaps to think about something else other than music, and allowed me to come back to it afresh and get rid of all of the neuroses perhaps that I built up around it.
And what were your first compositions like? Do you think there was a particular moment in your life when you said, aha, I'm going to try composing music?
Absolutely. My first compositions were, and I still have them, I composed them on a computer, an Atari 800 XL. It had a music program, and I wrote these little fugues. I was very enamored by the German 17th century organ composers, and so I did what every other person does, is I imitated what I liked. And so I wrote all of these little fugues that I couldn't play myself. And eventually, when I was a teenager, when I was 14, 15, I fell in love with Schoenberg. So of course I wrote these Schoenberg-type pieces, or what I thought were Schoenberg-type pieces. And I guess eventually, slowly over the course of the next 25 years, I emerged out of that somehow.
And the organ, you're a master organist. How did that come about?
Thank you for calling me a master organist. But there was a beautiful place in upstate New York called Deansboro. The city is still there. The museum is no longer there. My dad always had a wonderful fascination and love for the instrument. And at this museum, called the Musical Museum in Deansboro, they had 19th century American organs that you could sit down and play. It wasn't a museum that was a standoffish one. And so when I was about 9, 10 years old, 11 years old, my dad and mom would bring me to this museum, and just by sitting there and them pumping the instrument and me sitting at the instrument, I slowly began to fall in love with the sound and the touch and the reverberance. You feel it in your chest when you hear these tones go through you, and the various intonations and the out-of-tuneness and the in-tuneness. And when I was going to college, I found a couple of teachers that shared my love for it, and then it just blossomed from there. I've always maintained that is my first real instrument, even though I also play flute when I was a kid, and then a pianist all throughout my life. Organ is still my core.
You mentioned teachers. Can you identify one or two things that you learnt from your teachers that you also like to pass on to your students?
Absolutely. I was just thinking about this a lot recently because so many of my students are graduating now, and we've been looking at graduate schools. And I think about my students and myself in terms of we're writing music. I'm writing music that's for me and for where I am in the world right now. And if it's played after I'm dead, I won't know this. And if anyone else hears it 100 years from now, I won't know this. But what I do know is that I want to pass on some of the things that I've learned through experience to my students so that they can produce music that is important to them during their lifetimes and that they could pass it on. And that's the best we could do as teachers, is that we could pass it on and then carry this thread forward through time, because we have no idea what music from the past will be played 100 years from now, what music is important now will be played 1,000 years from now, should humanity continue on.
And one way we can continue that after anyone's death is through CDs from Innova Recordings, of course, and you've got not one but two, right?
Absolutely.
And can you tell us just briefly what those are about?
Of course, my first CD with Innova is a document of my close relationship with my great friend Jefferson Campbell, who actually brought me back into composing after this period where I was painting for so long. His instrument is the bassoon, and he started to ask me to write pieces for the instrument, his instrument, and I started to write pieces for bassoon and piano and bassoon and percussion and bassoon and this and bassoon and that, and I slowly realized I started to get a new voice, and his personal way of playing these pieces, repeated performances and so forth, really was a new way for me back into composing. The second CD that I have with Innova, A Waltz Through the Vapor, it also began with a personal relationship with the wonderful pianist Matthew McWright, who also took some of my pieces and played them in New York and Indonesia and all other places. And what I realized was that he had such a wonderful appreciation for the delicate nature of the contrapuntal tapestry of the music. I said, we have to, I'd love to document you playing these pieces in a good way. And so I gave him a huge amount of pieces for him to select from, and he chose what I thought were a very interesting combination of pieces, and on the CD he plays them better than anyone I've ever heard play them before.
And the title, A Waltz Through the Vapor, comes from?
A Waltz Through the Vapor. That was actually one of my first pieces when I came to Duluth. I imagined looking at an old photograph, and one of these old photographs of people dancing, and you see it as a still, but you know that there's motion there, and over time there's grit and grime and scratches, and the photograph begins to fade, and the faces get scrubbed out, and well, this is what happens to us also in time. We get scratched and faded, and perhaps our identities get lost in time. And the piece is a waltz that begins not totally traditional, but kind of traditional, and over the many repetitions that this waltz goes through, starts sort of in D major, it slowly becomes faded until it's almost unrecognizable. And it became, I think, the piece that really he found the most interesting, and that was the piece that started our relationship, so I figured that should be the title of the CD as well.
That's the piece that we go out on right now, so thank you very much for talking to us and for making beautiful music.
Thank you very much, it's my pleasure.